In this video, I will go over the steps to solve quadratics by completing the square. Before we begin, we want to talk about what a perfect square actually is. So if I gave you this problem, x plus 5 in parentheses squared, that would mean that I was expecting you to FOIL out x plus 5 times x plus 5. When you FOIL this, x times x is x squared, x times 5 is 5x, 5 times x is 5x, and 5 times 5 is 25. When you combine like terms, this would simplify to give you x squared plus 10x plus 25. Today, we are going to work backwards. So we are going to have the answer, and we're going to work backwards to write this as something squared. So what you want to do is you want to look at the pattern between 10, 5, and 25. And that pattern we are going to use as b divided by 2 squared. And I'll show you what that means in more detail in a second. But if you look, if my b value is 10, 10 divided by 2 gives me 5. That's where this 5 comes from. And 5 squared gives me 25. So we're going to use that pattern throughout the notes today. Here's our first problem. X squared plus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Your very first step when completing the square is to move your constant or move your c value to the other side. So if that's minus 35, I'm going to add 35 to both sides. When you do that, I want you to write this as x squared plus 2x plus blank equals 35 plus blank. We are going to set this up so I can rewrite this as a perfect square, as something squared. Here's where that pattern comes in. So first you're going to take half of 2. Half of 2 is 1, so I'm going to put x plus 1 in the parentheses. Then I'm going to square it. So 1 squared is 1. That's the number that's going to go in the blank. Whatever you put in the blank on the left, you have to put in the blank on the right. So all of your problems today are going to follow this specific pattern. Half of 2 is 1, 1 squared is 1. It kind of makes a triangle every time. Your blanks should always match. If you want to write out the formula to the side, b divided by 2 squared, in this case would be 2 divided by 2 squared, which is where this 1 comes from. It comes from that formula. All right, we're not quite finished. 35 plus 1 on the right becomes 36. And since I'm trying to solve for x, I'm going to square root both sides. The square root of something squared is going to cancel each other out, and I'm left with x plus 1 on the left. For the right side, the square root of 36 is 6, and we're going to write that as positive or negative 6. Your final step is to subtract the 1 over, and when you do that, I want you to actually put it in the front. That way you can see this as negative 1 plus or minus 6. My first answer, negative 1 plus 6, simplifies to positive 5. My second answer, negative 1 minus 6, that simplifies to negative 7. Complete the square has a lot of steps, but it's going to be the same steps every time. So let's try another one. Let's do x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. Your first step is to move the 15 to the other side. And we're going to set this up as x squared minus 2x plus blank equals 15 plus blank. Now it's time for me to use my pattern. I want to rewrite this as something squared. So I'm going to take half of negative 2. Half of negative 2 is negative 1, so I'm going to write this as x minus 1. And then negative 1 squared, negative 1 times negative 1, becomes positive 1. Remember, whatever you put in the blank on the left has to match the blank on the right. This is going to follow that pattern every time. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. To keep going, 15 plus 1 is 16. To get rid of the squared, I'm going to square root both sides. And I have x minus 1 equals, the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. My final step is to add 1 on both sides, making this 1 plus or minus 4. So my first answer, 1 plus 4, simplifies to 5. My second answer, 1 minus 4, simplifies to negative 3. If you think you're ready to give it a shot, go ahead and pause the video, try this one on your own, and then we'll check together. On this problem, the first step has already been done for you. The 3 is already moved to the other side. So I can go ahead and rewrite this as x squared plus 4x plus blank equals 3 plus blank. From here, I am trying to write this as something squared. So I'm going to take half of 4. Half of 4 is 2. I'm going to write this as x plus 2. And 2 squared is positive 4. Whatever goes in the blank on the left has to match the blank on the right. Remember, you're following that pattern every time. Half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4. To keep going, 3 plus 4 here is 7. And I'm going to square root both sides. Now, I can't take the square root of 7, so we are just going to leave that as plus or minus square root 7. If you could break this down and simplify it, you would want to go ahead and do that. But for 7, since it's prime, you're not going to break it down at all. My final step is to subtract 2 over, and I'm going to write my final answer as negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. I cannot combine those because of the square root sign. My next example, x squared minus 8x equals negative 7, also has the first step already done for us. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared minus 8x plus blank equals negative 7 plus blank. Pause the video and try to fill in the blanks, and then start once you're done. Half of negative 8 means that in my parentheses, I have x minus 4. Well, negative 4 squared means that in the blank, I have positive 16. Be careful with your signs. Negative times a negative is a positive. So on the right side here, negative 7 plus 16, that's going to simplify to a positive 9. Now, when I square root both sides, I'm left with x minus 4 on the left, and the square root of 9, we're going to write that as plus or minus 3. My last step is to add the 4 on both sides. So x is 4 plus or minus 3. My first answer, 4 plus 3, is positive 7. My second answer, 4 minus 3, is positive 1. All right, 2 more problems left. On this problem, you will notice that you have a number in front of x squared. You always want to check to see if you have a GCF before you begin. In this case, I can divide every single term by 2. So you want to go ahead and do that right at the beginning. I'm going to rewrite this as x squared minus 2x minus 7 equals 0. Now I'm ready to begin complete the square. So I'm going to add the 7 over. X squared minus 2x plus blank equals 7 plus blank. I'm going to continue my pattern. Half of negative 2 is negative 1, and negative 1 squared is positive 1. Make sure your blanks match. And 7 plus 1 on the right becomes positive 8. From here, I'm going to square root both sides. And when I take the square root of 8, I can't take the square root, but I can simplify it. 8 breaks down to 2 and 4, which breaks down to 2 and 2. I have a pair of 2's with another 2 left over. So to write this in simplified form, x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2 square root 2. You always want to simplify your square roots if possible. My last step is to add the 1 over, making this 1 plus or minus 2 square root 2. I cannot combine those because of the square root sign, so I'm done. Go ahead and pause the video, try this one on your own, and then replay it once you're ready to check. Your first step on this problem is to divide out the 5 in front. You're going to divide every single term by 5. When you do that, this becomes x squared plus 4x plus 2 equals negative 1. My next step is to move the 2 over. So x squared plus 4x plus blank equals negative 3 plus blank. My goal is to write this as something squared, so I'm going to take half of 4. Half of 4 is positive 2. 2 squared is positive 4, and make sure both of your blanks match. On the right side, negative 3 plus 4 is going to reduce to positive 1. My next step is to get rid of the squared by square rooting both sides. So x plus 2 is plus or minus 1 because the square root of 1 is 1. My last step is to subtract the 2 over. So I have negative 2 plus or minus 1. My first answer, negative 2 plus 1, reduces to negative 1. My second answer, negative 2 minus 1, reduces to negative 3. And we're done. You can always check your answers by plugging them back into the original to see if it gives you a true or false statement. Complete the Square has a lot of steps, so if you need to rewatch this video a couple times to get the hang of it, go for it. The more you practice, the more you'll get the hang of all the steps.